much for this very gracious invitation and warm welcome. Vanakkam. As a person born in Chennai, I consider it a privilege to be connected even virtually with the students and faculty of this college. And I thank Professor Ravichandran for making this possible. Slides, please.
Thank you, Pritika, for your wonderful introduction. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the most awaited moment. With great honor and respect, may I invite Honorable Padma Bhushan, Dr.k Srinath Reddy to deliver the keynote. Sir, please.
Thank you very much. When we are really talking about health, quite often people take it for granted till a person becomes ill. And then they think of health only as illness care, which they have to seek in a hospital. But health is actually much more and of much greater value at every moment in life. And the first preference, of course, would be not to fall ill or to delay illness as far as possible and to get prompt relief when it happens without necessarily suffering either physical hardship or financial hardship. And therefore, I believe it's important for students of management to also appreciate health in the wider perspective, because health is determined by many factors and many of them require good management skills to be addressed appropriately. Firstly, why should you value health? At the individual level, health has an intrinsic value as well as an instrumental value. In terms of intrinsic value, it provides you well-being, enables self-care, functionality, you can do your own things, cognition, it enables you to understand things much better. It enables you to participate in a fulfilling sexual and reproductive life. It provides you an opportunity for leisure time physical activities, enjoyment of culture, and pleasant social interactions with family and friends. But it also has an instrumental value. It enables you to do a lot of other things by accessing education, employment, getting a decent income, enabling you to uptake new skills over a period of time, advance your own career that way, enables you to travel, participate in competitive sports, performing arts, and have social interactions across wide networks of extended groups. But beyond the individual too, at the level of populations, countries, or in terms of people, in terms of community groups, it has a tremendous value. When you look at how investing in health boosts national and global economic growth, we recognize that it protects and promotes productive human resources, reduces both absenteeism and presenteeism, where people are present, but because they're unwell, they don't perform their duties adequately. It reduces expenditure on healthcare and enables that money to be spent on other developmental activities. It creates employment, because even when employment is now shrinking because of technological substitution in industry, in agriculture, in the service sector, the health sector, healthcare as well as preventive health services are actually creating many more jobs. And this is something we recognize even during the COVID-19 period, that a multi-layered, multi-skilled health workforce is very much necessary for India and for many other countries. It catalyzes technological innovation, and we recognize from multiple reports that the previous impression that health was merely a cost and was not a productive resource is wrong, that health actually accelerates economic development of countries. We also recognize that health has multiple determinants. We usually think of the health system in terms of its components of a health workforce of those who deliver health services, infrastructure like hospitals and healthcare facilities, availability of drugs, vaccines, and technologies, health financing, of health information systems, which provide you data on surveillance, or in terms of a variety of other information systems, which tells you about supply chains and so on. But it also enables you to have good governance of the entire system. All of these are part of the health system. But even more than what happens within the health system, it is the social, environmental, and commercial determinants of health and nutrition which influence the health of populations and, in turn, the health of individuals. And these are factors which operate at the societal level, like water, clean drinking water, sanitation, food system, environment, social stability, the pace of development. And there are also factors which operate at the personal level, which are also socially influenced, but reflect much more as personal attributes, like income, education, occupation, social status, gender, networks. And all of these will have to be connected to the people. But it is our choices that we make of the political and economic system that actually will influence each one of these elements. And therefore, understanding how these societal dynamics play out is very important for every individual so that we can collectively influence the health of our society. So when we're looking at the cascade of determinants of health, at the individual level, we have beliefs which are acquired, behaviors which are practiced, and biology, which are gene-environmental interactions. But further upstream, at the level of the family and the community, you have cultural perceptions, socioeconomic priorities. Do I spend more on the food for my family, or do I waste it on tobacco or alcohol? Pathways of availability and access. Do I have smoke-free public places? Are pedestrian pathways available, which are safe? Are cycling lanes available? All these become very important. Then, even more upstream and even more important nowadays are factors that are operating at the national and global level, which in turn affect the other factors up to the individual level. These are the stage and speed of economic development. Distributional issues of equity. How is that income, national wealth distributed? And demand and supply issues of trade. So when we are really looking at what are the threats to health, security at the population level, then we have seen very many things happening. First, of course, our weak health systems. But then we see pandemic threats, like we are seeing COVID-19 now. We see conflict. We see antimicrobial resistance. We see pollution of air, water, and soil. And we are seeing climate change. All of these impinge upon health at the population level and ultimately will adversely impact health at the individual level. But at the individual level, how are they reflected? They're reflected in a rising burden of non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancers, chronic respiratory disease, mental health disorders, and so on. Then gender violence, endangered maternal and child health. That is a continuing problem that we have. Lack of nutrition security, mental health disorders and addictions, and lack of road safety, low level of health literacy in the population, and lack of financial coverage for health. All of these are manifestations at the individual level. Taking up some of these as examples, we recognize that in 2019, the SARS-CoV-2 virus was reported from China and brought in the threat of COVID. And now, even in 2022, in the form of Omicron and its variants of Omicron, the subvariants, the virus is still traveling the world. But this was not the only one. We have seen many of these zoonotic infections coming in the last several decades. We have seen Ebola, we have seen Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus, H1N1, West Nile virus, SARS-1, H5N1, swine flu, avian flu. We have a number of these that have been coming in. And these are threats that are rising in the last 60 to 70 years, much more than before, because human beings have provided conveyor belts for hitherto confined viruses and vectors to travel from forestry and wildlife animals into veterinary habitat and human habitat. And we have actually provided them an opportunity to spread far and fast. As David Quammen remarks in his book Spillover, ecological circumstance provides the opportunity for spillover. Evolution seizes the opportunity, explores the possibilities, and helps convert spillovers to pandemics. The ecological circumstances created by humans. Evolution, in terms of genetic variations and mutations, is seized by the virus. So how are we building conveyor belts for transmission? Firstly, deforestation provides proximity between wildlife and human populations, and often through captive bred animals. So when the virus comes into the captive bred animals who are being grown for food or sometimes for agriculture, then it can spread from there to the humans. Or it can directly come to the humans if humans are eating exotic forest animals. So you have urban growth also increasing deforestation, expansion of agriculture, logging, extractive industries like mining, high consumption of animal foods in wet markets with animal mixing, as we saw in the Wuhan wet market, captive breeding of animals, which are factory farms, huge amount of meat produced for rising meat consumption, especially in the high-income countries. Grain-fed animals require agricultural expansion. Instead of just feeding humans, we have to feed all these cattle who then have to become meat for humans. And all of this takes a toll on the forests. Then, of course, once they've entered, the viruses can travel fast from one human to another human, one country to another country, because of the high-speed travel that we have nowadays. For trade, tourism, and education and employment, we have many fast communication channels. But at the same time, we see other threats apart from zoonotic pandemics, and some of these are also interlinked. We know that pollution reduces the resistance of the respiratory tract for viral infection and can increase the threat of death from COVID also. But pollution actually is a major danger that is all pervasive, with or without a pandemic. And we have different types of pollution: household pollution, ambient air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, occupational pollution, lead and other chemicals. And we see, for example, when we consider air pollutants and outdoor air pollutants, or what's called ambient air pollution, it comes in from particulate matter from traffic and industrial sources. And usually the pollutants are ozone, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and of course, the particulate matter, as I mentioned. And when we look at particulate matter, there can be PM 2.5 or particulate matter 2.5, which comes from combustion particles, organic compounds, metals, or PM 10, which comes from larger particles like dust, pollen, mold, etc., of 10 microns. But compare that for just size with a human hair. A human hair is 50 to 70 microns. A fine beach sand, like in the beach of Chennai, would be 90 microns. Now, there are other ultrafine particles also of 1 to 1.5 microns, which can penetrate even deeper into the respiratory tract and enter the blood vessels. So we see a huge amount of tissue damage happening from the inflammatory reaction that these particles evoke in our body. And there are multiple sources. There are line sources like vehicles, which we see in the traffic jams of Delhi and Chennai. And there are point sources like power plants and factories. There are area sources like dump sites and sewage treatment plants. There are natural sources like forest fires and volcanoes. All of these can dump a lot of pollutants into the air. And these cause a huge amount of damage. While most people think that it's only lungs that are affected, causing a huge amount of lung damage with either chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or provoking asthmatic disorders in children and so on, actually, the larger proportion of deaths comes from cardiovascular events. Because of the inflammatory reaction that they evoke, the blood vessels get damaged, blood clotting tendency increases. You can get heart attacks, you can get strokes or brain attacks. It can lead to heart failure, dementia, cognitive impairment. And now there is increasing evidence it is linked to high blood pressure, diabetes, and even obesity, because inflammation is the underlying pathology for all of these. And since Indians have one of the highest risks of cardiovascular disease and diabetes in the world, we recognize that these are going to be even more dangerous in our country, because against the background risk, we have the pollutants enhancing the risk much more. Moving ahead from pollution to climate change, there are very many manifestations of climate change on human health. Firstly, the severe heat strokes. They cause a huge amount of physical and mental health damage, the heat effects. Then, of course, you have waterborne diseases. When you have extreme weather events, the climate change can cause flooding, and then you can get cholera, gastroenteritis, typhoid, and a number of other entities. But also when water is scarce, then people will drink polluted water, and that again can cause a huge amount of problem in terms of disease conditions. Then you have extreme weather events. You have floods, you have famine, you have all kinds of cyclonic storms, and all of these are increasing in frequency right now. And we see the manifestations of that even in India. Then you have a huge amount of vector-borne diseases. And these are when you have vectors like mosquitoes, which are currently confined to certain spaces. They can grow in warmer atmosphere, warmer circumstances, where global warming is making it possible for them to grow in other areas as well. Then you have exacerbated air pollution. When the CO2 cloud descends onto the earth, then that can actually form a cloud where the temperature can actually enable more concentration of air pollutants beneath the cloud. So we see air pollution can be certainly increased. Then you have an increased risk of chronic diseases like cancers and even chronic respiratory disease. But certainly we know that high blood pressure and stroke and heart attacks increase during this period. Then you have a huge amount of impact on agriculture and nutrition security. Climate refugees, because of various climate changes, including floods and famine and intolerable heat, you'll find people migrating to a number of places. They'll carry some diseases with them, or they'll acquire new diseases on the way or in the new population where they go. So there are a plethora of health conditions that are associated with climate change. So what are the main greenhouse gases? We are familiar with carbon dioxide mostly, but there are also methane and the oxides of nitrogen and fluorinated gases, the chlorofluorocarbons, which are man-made chemicals that are far more potent than carbon dioxide and stay in the atmosphere for a long time. Even the oxides of nitrogen remain up to 120 years, very long. Incidentally, it is one single engineer called Thomas Midgley who was responsible both for leaded gasoline or leaded petrol and for chlorofluorocarbons. So the amount of damage he unintentionally did to the environment is so huge. Now, in terms of global warming, we know that the Paris Accord set a target of 1.5 degrees centigrade. If it is business as usual, it will be 4.2 degrees centigrade by 2100. Yesterday, there was a lecture by Professor Johan Rockström at the India International Center, where he actually describes the planetary boundaries and the depletion of variety of natural resources that we are having. But in terms of actual global warming, he warns us even 1.5 degrees centigrade is too much. We have to stick to 1 degree centigrade, and it does not appear that even with the Paris pledges being fulfilled, we will get anywhere below 3.3 degrees centigrade. So this planet is in serious trouble. It's in serious danger. And climate change will harm health in very many ways. we have vector-borne diseases, which, as I said, even as humans lie listless and wilting in the heat, the mosquitoes will go athletic and climb to higher heights and move farther and cause higher death toll through malaria, dengue, chikungunya, and so on. Then you will have water insecurity, food insecurity, extreme climatic events like floods and famine, displaced populations, and vulnerable human settlements where even coastal populations are going to be flooded and displaced. Then we recognize that there is a huge impact on food systems. We are living in a situation where food systems are threatening the environment. The way we are actually growing, farming, and also breeding animals as part of agriculture is threatening the environment. And environmental degradation from a variety of sources is in turn threatening the food systems. And this mutually detrimental relationship will get worse if we don't change. Now, just to give you an example of what happens when there is a climate change and that is going to be affecting nutrition. By year 2100, it is anticipated that 40% of the world's land surface will likely experience altered climates. And by year 2050, agricultural output is projected to fall by 2% per decade. And this happens because of the impact of climate change on crop and livestock production. The food demand is projected to rise, and also, remember, we will have less amount of arable land for agriculture as the human population grows. And the food demand is projected to rise by 14% per decade because of population growth, increased urbanization, resulting in a greater consumption of food because there is a usual tendency associated with urbanization to ask for more food along with increasing income levels. And the poverty reduction makes it possible to purchase more food. Therefore, the consumption will rise. So we are going to be having a mismatch between consumption and production. And therefore, there will be serious nutrition shortages where some sections of the population across countries and within countries will be subjected to great nutritional deprivation because of climate change. Higher production of staple crops will not be enough to make agriculture more resilient. First of all, the technologies that we have been using for increasing agricultural production themselves are sometimes counterproductive. But also, there is a law of diminishing returns for technological innovations, and we will not be able to really step up our staple crop production to the extent needed. But even whatever increases there will not be enough to make agriculture more resilient to climate change or better able to address the world's need for improved diets. Nutrient-rich crops are more susceptible to droughts, pests, diseases, and temperature fluctuations. And higher carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will also reduce the nutrient content of staple crops. And there is also soil degradation going on, which also reduces nutrient quality. So we are threatened both in terms of quantity and quality of agricultural production. Now you will see that many nutrient crops would have, it has been projected by the Data Science Institute of the Columbia University, that many nutrient crops would have 3 to 17% lower concentrations of protein, iron, and zinc when grown under elevated carbon dioxide levels. Now, they have done their projections for India based on this scenario. And they say by 2050, when all of you will be in the prime of your life, in a sense, very productive midlife, India will be experiencing 2.9% increase in zinc deficient population. That is 49.6 million new zinc deficient persons will be arising in the Indian population. There will be a 2.2% increase in protein deficient population. Already we have a lot of protein deficient people. There will be 38.2 million new protein deficient persons. And 106 million children and 396 million women would become iron deficient and therefore anemic. These are dire predictions. And along with this, we also know that there will be other effects. Fruit and vegetables in that heat will ripen early and rot early. So there'll be much greater loss of some of the essential nutrient food crops. And unfortunately, we are not well positioned. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are particularly prone to productivity losses for climate change because major staples in these regions, rice and wheat, are already being grown at the top limit of temperature tolerance. And any further increase is going to be very detrimental, with as much as 10% yield loss for every degree centigrade of warming predicted in some locations. Along with this, we are going to be seeing huge water stress. Already, 54% of India faces high to extremely high water stress. And we are going to see much greater water stress as we move along with global warming. At the same time, the sea level is going to rise. I know that many coastal areas in the world are going to be threatened. Some of the island nations are going to be submerged and disappear. Even coastal cities of India, including Chennai, will face a problem as the sea level rises. And now you can see how the sea level has been rising faster and faster each year with global warming. And the rate of change is now about 3.4 millimeters per year. So it's not just the Maldives that is threatened. A number of coastal cities in India are going to be threatened. And this causes a lot of challenges even for the fish production. India has about 7,000 kilometers coastline, and fish constitutes an integral part of diet for many communities. Marine fish catch has fallen since 1996 at an annual rate of 1.22 metric tons. And this can leave the population at risk for nutrient deficiencies due to lack of access to dietary alternatives. And the fish diversity is also going to be affected because ocean warming will affect fish diversity, distribution, abundance, and phenology. And what happens when the ocean rises because of warming? It sort of inundates even the riverbeds, and the coastal agriculture will suffer. We are already seeing that in Sundarbans, in India, as well as in Bangladesh, where large amounts of coastal areas in that area are now inundated with saline water. Agriculture is no longer possible, nutrition is suffering, and climate refugees are moving inland. So the message is very clear. We need ecological sustainability to provide us ecological security. And only ecological security can provide us human health security. And when we look at even something like agriculture, food and nutrition, we recognize that nutrition is absolutely important for good human health. Right from preconception, even before pregnancy of the girl child, to during pregnancy, early childhood, and across the life course, nutrition is our best defense against disease and ill health. Yet, our nutrition security is greatly threatened by many factors. We are seeing climate change, increasing global population, increasing water usage, urbanization, diminished availability of arable land, changing food prices. All of these are interfering with the interplay of agriculture, food, and nutrition. And even the way we are commercially producing food is also greatly affecting the quality of our nutrition. Because this is on the one side, you see on the left side, what's called the Harvard food plate, where they say what should be the proportion of good, nutritious, balanced meal on a plate. About fruits and vegetables should constitute about 49% of that plate. Meat, fish, eggs, beans, etc. Protein sources only about 20%. Oils and fats about 3%. Cereals and starches about 20%. And milk products about 8%. Now look at what is happening in terms of agricultural production according to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. This is the global statistic. Cereals are being overproduced. The sugars are being overproduced. Fruits and vegetables are being produced in much more limited quantities. So you're having a tremendous imbalance between the nutritional needs of the global population and what the food industry and agriculture industry are actually producing for the population of the world. And this is because of commercial pressures wanting to make quick profits out of imbalanced nutrition by selling products which are not health promoting and which are replacing traditional healthy diets. And this is a complex situation where we find that when you are looking at nutritional epidemiology, what we were focusing on as nutrition scientists was on single nutrients. Oh, what will this particular nutrient do? This particular fatty acid do? This particular protein do? Or this particular type of sugar do? Then we came down to food items. What do eggs do? What do potatoes do? What do certain fruits do? And so on. But now we realize that it's composite diets that matter. It's dietary diversity that matters. It's not just one nutrient or one food item. It's how they combine that matters. And from there, we actually start looking at food systems. How are the food systems providing crop diversity and product diversity, which will enable us to have dietary diversity? And how are those food systems being affected by market forces? And how do we influence those markets or mold the markets? And how do we actually bring in greater sanity into global nutritional governance where transnational trade is increasingly distorting the kind of food products that are being supplied into the market, global market everywhere, including into India? And this we are also doing in a situation of climate change when food and nutrition are being challenged by other elements. So this is something that we cannot address in a purely linear fashion. Most of research in science has proceeded thus far, especially in health, on linear models. But this calls for complexity science because we are dealing with complex adaptive systems, multiple complex adaptive systems interacting with each other. Health is a complex adaptive system. Environment is a complex adaptive system. Food and agriculture systems are complex adaptive systems. And when they all interact with each other, you have to understand complexity science, which means you have to be very multidisciplinary in your orientation and understanding. So what is our nutrition policy? In the 20th century, we focused much more on technology-aided production. Emphasis was on individual behavior change. Oh, you change your behavior, eat less sugar, eat more protein or something like that, or eat more fruit and reduce your oil consumption. So it was considered that individuals could change and thereby protect their health. Of course, it still remains true, but we recognize that there are so many societal forces which are altering the dynamics of nutrition, even in terms of individuals' ability to access good nutrition. Therefore, in the 21st century, we must focus on both production and consumption patterns, which are compatible with sustainable development. The emphasis is on systems thinking, and that's where management comes in. You have to have systems thinking for broader societal change. People will say, oh, it's your personal choice. What you eat is your personal choice. And the food industry says, don't interfere, don't tell people, and don't regulate, don't tax unhealthy products, don't have advertising restrictions, because it's entirely the choice of the person. But choice is never a totally free choice, not an unconstrained choice. Choice can be conscious based on the right kind of health information or the wrong kind of health information. Choice can be conditioned based on marketing and promotional factors, aggressive marketing and promotion. It can be based on cultural factors. It can be based on a number of financial factors where you're constrained in your choice by the availability of foods and affordability of foods. Therefore, we have to address all of these with the right kind of health and nutrition literacy for the population, having the right kind of regulatory mechanisms to prevent marketing of unhealthy foods and making healthy foods more affordable choice. So we have to mold the markets. We need that through consumer consciousness. We have to appeal to the industry that there is a health dividend. If people are healthy, economies will prosper and all industries will also prosper as a result. We need a strong national policy framework which offers both incentives and disincentives. And we need global agreements, like in the case of tobacco, there's a framework convention on tobacco control, which all countries have signed up to, or at least 188 countries have signed up to. Similarly, even for food trade, etc., we need some of these global agreements. To proceed to the last part of my presentation, we also recognize that there is an importance of economic growth. Economic growth and population health have a bidirectional relationship. When there is an economic growth, population health improves in terms of life expectancy. When population health improves, the economic growth also is accelerated, and there are a number of commission reports that show that. But at the same time, we recognize that poverty can pitchfork an individual into poor health, and poor health can actually precipitate or perpetuate poverty. We know that when per capita income rises, life expectancy rises up to about $5,000 per capita. So countries with low per capita income will benefit with economic growth, but afterwards it plateaus off. This is called the Millennium Preston curve. But we also know that how the wealth is distributed in countries has even a greater influence. National mortality rates tend to be lowest in countries that have the smaller income differences and thus have lower levels of relative deprivation. That means lesser the inequality within countries, the greater the gains for the same level of income growth. That we have seen in the difference between Japan and the United States, and many other examples are there. And therefore, we have to also not just focus on economic growth, but on reducing income and social inequalities within the society. And therefore, it's not just equality of opportunity, but also equality of social circumstances. As an economist, a British economist of the 1930s said, what is required is not only an open road, but an equal start. And I believe that the policy of the Tamil Nadu government with respect to NEET reflects this particular attitude. And I believe it's absolutely important that we provide an equal start to everybody, not just pretend that we have an open road. Universal health coverage is when all people receive the quality health services they need without suffering financial hardship. This is what the WHO says, and it's now part of the Sustainable Development Goal targets. Now, there are three different dimensions to this. One is population coverage. Who is covered? What proportion of the population is covered? Service coverage. What are the services provided in the service package? And financial protection. How much of financial protection is actually provided by the program? And there, the actual priorities may differ between section to section. Politicians will look at what proportion of the population is covered, even if the actual service package is shallow, because they want more people to be happy. Doctors will prefer a very wide service package because they want their patients to get the best of everything. Whereas the people who are managing the budgets in the Niti Aayog or in the health ministry, the civil servants, they say, how can we use this money to reduce the affordability barrier and reduce healthcare related poverty while at the same time keeping the overall budget intact? How do we reduce out-of-pocket expenditure? So these will have to be balanced. And for that, we use a package. Periodically, we revise the package. But in this, we use cost effectiveness analysis of how much health will the money buy. And extended cost effectiveness analysis is now coming into vogue. In addition, how much of financial protection will the money buy to prevent people from becoming poor as a result of healthcare expenditure? So we are also having to emphasize equity. It's not just cost effectiveness. And equity operates in two dimensions. One is horizontal equity, where there is universal access to a common set of services for everybody, an essential health package which is available to everybody. But in addition, because there are pre-existing health inequities, we have to bridge those health inequities and cover the vulnerable groups and the disadvantaged groups much more effectively. So we have a vertical component of equity in which there are additional resources provided or additional services provided beyond the essential health package, which is available for everybody. So our universal health coverage program has to take both aspects of equity into account. And the role of the government is as a provider through a strengthened public sector and where needed, contracted private sector, public financing from tax revenues, preferably, but supplemented by other forms of insurance, including employer insurance and private insurance. A single payer system creates a large risk pool, and therefore we should aim for a single payer system by merging the various kinds of health financing mechanisms. Strategic purchasing, like the Tamil Nadu Medical Systems Corporation, uses its power, monopsonic power, to purchase at a lower cost, but with quality assured products. That is the kind of example the rest of the country should follow. And we should have robust regulation of standards of healthcare, quality, price, ethics, and education. So almost to conclude, if we are really looking for health equity, the future is already here. It's not very evenly distributed, said William Gibson. So in order to provide health equity, we need universal health coverage, which provides financial protection. This is necessary but not sufficient. We also need to address the social determinants of health through multisectoral action, and we need to empower communities through a rights-based approach to health. So if we are really looking at health assurance rather than health insurance, we're looking at three concentric circles. Health financing is in the center, predominantly tax-based, supplemented by other forms of insurance. But all the entitlements of that will not be delivered unless we have a robust health system with a multi-layered, multi-skilled health workforce, health management information systems, infrastructure, governance, drugs, vaccines, and technologies, and community engagement. But at the same time, the outer circle is important, in which we address all the elements of the social, environmental, and commercial determinants of health. So when we combine all the three circles, we'll get health assurance. And people must influence decisions in each of these elements. And people who are studying management like you must make sure, firstly, that the right choices are made and the resources are also spent in the right manner. So we need more money for health and more health for the money by efficiencies that are gained through appropriate allocative and utilization efficiencies. So to conclude, the health of persons, people, populations, and planet are all linked together. The health of human beings extends from the pulse to the planet. And public health is something that can actually provide the broad platform for a debate and discussion on this, because it identifies and influences determinants of health at the population level, which impact on health and disease at the individual level. And public health intervenes in order to advance human health at the population level through policy instruments, whether it's tobacco taxes or protected cycling lanes, through systems, through services, and through community action. And therefore, at the Public Health Foundation of India and our Indian Institutes of Public Health, we believe that public health is truly multidisciplinary. It's a confluence of environmental and life sciences, epidemiology and allied quantitative sciences, humanities and social sciences, and economics and management also. So please remember that you too can contribute to public health by influencing any sector to become much more favorable to health. And we invite your partnership in that effort, because health is needed by everyone in society, and every one of you can influence health, and especially public health. Thank you very much. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. You have been gracious in your invitation and very generous in your attention. Thanks a lot. Vanakkam.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening our knowledge. We are, we are really glad to be part of this webinar and have learned new things like invest in health, boost nation and global economic growth, cascade of health, determination, pandemic infection, nutrition loss due to heat. Now, friends, the forum is open for question and answer session. You can put for your questions, please.
Yeah, this is Vijay here. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. Actually, I have a question related. When we talk about health of a person, the first thing that comes to our mind is food. We know that a lot of chemicals are being mixed in the food, right?
Yes, that's true. We have to make sure that as far as possible, our food is free of pollutants, chemical pollutants. Organic food is good, but it's expensive. We'll have to find methods of how to grow more organically without too much of pollutants, whether from pesticides or fertilizers. But at the same time, the additional pollutants that are added during processing and preservation are also a problematic area. And therefore, we do need much better regulation in order to prevent food pollutants. Certainly, even fruit and vegetables, unfortunately, can lose their nutritive value if a lot of pollutants are added, pesticides are added, or other pollutants actually affect the quality of food.
Thank you, sir.
So happy afternoon, sir. This is Subiksha Sridharan speaking to you, sir. Actually, my question is, as we all know, Corona evolved such like Alpha, Beta, Delta, Omicron, etc. And the Corona spreads out until we find a cure to end it. Other doctors, I find no answers from them is that to make Corona end, it takes more than 5 to 8 years. So, what will be your point of view, sir? Will it takes more than 5 to 8 years to make a cure all over the world? Will it affect the population? Will it affect the economics of the world?
See, first of all, let's differentiate between Corona and COVID. Corona is the virus, COVID is the disease. Now, the virus is not going away. It'll stay with us in one form or the other, as one variant or other. It was very foolish on part of people, even scientists, to think in 2020, we can completely make the virus vanish. Right now, there are only two viruses which have been eradicated. One is smallpox, and that is with a powerful vaccine. And it also, the second one is rinderpest in cattle. But the transmission of respiratory viruses like influenza and these coronaviruses is extremely difficult to completely eradicate. What will happen is that the virus can change its form and become milder and milder, even though it will remain infectious and may become a seasonal infection. That may happen this year, it may happen in a couple of years, it may happen in 2 or 3 years. It depends partly on the behavior of the virus and on our behavior. Why does the virus actually change its character to become more infectious but less virulent? That is when it meets difficulty in spreading easily from person to person. So if you have a lot of people who are vaccinated, a lot of people who are wearing masks, a lot of people who have been infected by the previous type of variant, and their immunity is offering resistance to the virus will then find less number of human bodies to infect. So in order to gain access to more people, it becomes more infectious, possibly starts developing a tendency to evade the immunity, but it also becomes less virulent because if it starts killing the limited number of people it can infect, it will write its own death certificate. Its species cannot propagate. So that is the logic of evolutionary biology. So even H1N1 virus, which killed 50 million people in 1918 to 1920 in the famous so-called Spanish flu pandemic. It was not Spanish flu, it was a global flu. And it came back in India in 2009 as H1N1. It was still the H1N1 virus, but in a different variant. And this time it spread through the world. It was, WHO declared it a pandemic, but it hardly caused a flutter. It did not damage much. It did not kill many people. It actually caused a very mild illness. So we know that the viruses can mutate to less virulent forms. And our hope is that this SARS-CoV-2 virus also will mutate to a less virulent form. Omicron already is mild. Whether there'll be a less virulent variant coming up, we'll have to wait and see. But as more people across the world are getting vaccinated, and therefore vaccine equity becomes important, and also more people are getting exposed to this less virulent form of the virus, more immunity will be built up. But that immunity will not last permanently, unlike some other viruses where the immunity is lifelong. Here, the immunity will fade in a year or 2 years, and therefore you will get seasonal infections. And when a new generation of people come in who don't have immunity, like kids growing up, they may also get infected. So you are likely to see, in the best case scenario, a periodic seasonal eruption of COVID, but in a much milder form. But whether it will happen this year, whether it will take 2 or 3 more years, we cannot really say. But it's very likely that we are moving in that direction. But if you have any idea that the virus is going to be completely expelled from this planet, please get rid of it. The virus will keep us company.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have one question.
Right.
You have said in food system, there will be an imbalance between consumption and production nutrition because of nutrition deprivation will be there while you're talking in the food system. So how we will rectify that, sir?
Well, the rectification has to be in 2 ways. One is we have to stop having a disproportionate emphasis on grain-fed cattle foods, which high-income countries are resorting to, because that is a huge amount of grain diversion and a lot of land diversion as well. And it's also very water-intensive. There are a number of crops, even, I mean, beef, for example, is one of the most water-intensive type of products. But at the same time, even there are other crops like tobacco, which is a very water-intensive. So you should stop wasting your agricultural land on non-nutritious products. Why do you want to spend 4.5 million hectares of global arable land on tobacco, which is harmful to health, rather than on growing nutritious crops? So we'll have to redefine our priorities of food production and redefine our methods of food production. Then we'll have to promote more balanced meals among everybody. So because basically there is a lot of overconsumption of ultra-processed foods, and that is also leading to a huge amount of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and other cancers and so on. So once we rebalance the nature of our consumption also, that will reset some of the demand. But of course, we must ensure that we slow down climate change as well. That's also important.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have one more question, sir. Bless you, sir. So one more question. How daily wages get the health insurance by the government, sir? Like daily wages?
Well, in a proper system where you are ensuring health equity in a society which is placing a lot of emphasis on welfare measures for the population, everybody should have universal health coverage, irrespective of their income. And particularly primary care and secondary care should be available free of cost to everybody. And that many countries are providing from their tax. Our tax to GDP ratio is still pretty low, unlike many other countries in the same developing country bracket. So we do need better collection of taxes also. You don't want so many people evading taxes, so your collection of taxes will have to be higher. Tax to GDP ratio has to be higher so that you can actually invest more of that money in universal health coverage systems. then ensure that primary care, secondary care, and life-saving elements of tertiary care are provided free to everybody, and make sure that those who are most vulnerable because of low incomes are especially protected through a full package of services. So that is how we will have to evolve our services. So we have still a very low expenditure, public expenditure on health. At the moment, the government is saying we are spending 2.1% of our GDP on health. That is, they're including water, sanitation, and other services. If you take health alone, it's still about 1.4%. Whereas we are told that basically you have to spend at least about 6% or at least 5% of your GDP on health, and out of which the major portion has to come from the government. In fact, out-of-pocket expenditure should not exceed 20% if you are to claim that you are achieving universal health coverage. So for that, you need a very different system of health financing. So your daily wage laborers also have to be entitled to those services, and irrespective of where they are working, even if they are migrating from one part of India to another part of India, that facility should be portable. That means they should be able to get their services wherever they are working.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Sonali.
Yes, Sonali. Yeah.
Sir, what could be the people will do, sir, when they are going for when they are a vegan people? Is it good for the planet, sir?
You are talking about vegans, is it?
Yes, sir.
Well, interestingly, yes, it's very interesting that you raised this question. I didn't show that slide because I had a limitation of time for my talk. But the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations has calculated that if everybody on Earth became a vegan, about 70% of the food requirement would go down in the world. Of agricultural production requirement would go down in the world. That's because animal foods are water intensive, they're grain intensive. There's so many things happen which actually are causing. But everybody is not going to become vegan overnight. It's unrealistic. But interestingly, they also said, if you eliminate animal foods like beef and chicken, etc., and then and also dairy products, and stick to fish and eggs, then also you'll still be able to retain that advantage of reducing the requirement of agricultural production by about 70%. But even assuming that we make some concessions, everybody is not going to stop eating chicken. Somebody will eat chicken, but there is, you can still substantially reduce the amount of resources required for agricultural production if you give up some elements of the diet, and particularly a huge dependence on animal foods. In fact, if you move to mostly plant-based diets, global warming also will greatly benefit. That has been shown very clearly. The best thing that you can actually do for global warming at the individual level is to try and become as much a vegetarian as possible, or as many plant foods as possible. But I know that many people are non-vegetarian, but the whole idea is to reduce the dependence on highly meat-based diets and go to highly plant-based diets.